Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Rivers Trust Conference for 2025. I am Rebecca Duncan, the Media and Events Lead at the Rivers Trust, and with my colleagues, I am going to be shepherding us through today's event. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. I'm the Communications Assistant for Media and Events, and I will also be joining you today at this annual conference.
Brilliant, thanks, Emily. So hopefully those intro slides that I've just brought up are displaying correctly. Emily, let me know if not, but just going to give a really quick intro here for a few minutes before we head into the sessions of the day. So again, welcome along to our annual conference titled A Blooming Disaster, the Causes and Costs of Blue-Green Algae. We always start with a little bit of housekeeping, so just a few things to note for all of our webinars today. We will have closed captions enable, and you can enable those by clicking CC on the bottom toolbar on your Zoom screen and then show subtitle. You can also use the same button to change the size of those subtitles if you like. I think pretty much all of our sessions today have Q&As at the end for the audience, and we've got the Q&A function. Again, that's a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can use to submit your questions for our session chairs. We've also got the chat box running, so that's more for general comments, interactions. We really encourage you to use this as much as possible, including now, if you'd like to say hello. I can see a couple of messages coming in already. And finally, a note that the whole day is being recorded. As attendees, you will receive an automatic email from Zoom to tell you when those recordings are available, but we'll also be uploading them to the Rivers Trust YouTube channel in the coming days, certainly in the next week or so. And Emily's also going to put these points in the chat if she hasn't already, as a reminder. Okay, next, in terms of the shape of the day, I will leave the agenda on the screen for a couple of minutes for you to peruse. And while that's on, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the thinking behind our topic, our theme for today's conference of blue-green algae and algal blooms, and why we've decided to focus on this for our annual conference this year. So many of you may be already aware of the basics of blue-green algae, but perhaps some of you aren't. Again, it would be interesting to know. But blue-green algae are actually a type of photosynthesizing bacteria called cyanobacteria. Now bear with me here because science isn't my normal comfort zone, so hopefully I'm sticking to the basics and getting it all correct. But essentially, when conditions are favourable, to put it simply, with a high concentration of nutrients in freshwater, the blue-green algae that are a naturally occurring thing in freshwater bodies, when certain conditions are happening, those will proliferate, and that's what causes the algal blooms that are really quite shocking to see. Clearly in the UK, a very prominent example of that in recent years is in Northern Ireland on Lough Neagh, where algal blooms have become pretty much an annual thing. And that has huge knock-on effects for local communities, businesses, tourists, water users, all sorts of things really. So in the morning today in particular, we're going to be unpacking that a bit. Now, pollution from catchments, nutrient pollution, and rivers, along with weather conditions like high temperatures and low rainfall, can really create the perfect storm for these algal blooms to form. But in fact, they're very much a symptom of wider issues that I think we have in the UK, Ireland, and also across the world, with kind of systematic failures in land and water management. So all of this in our agenda is what we're looking to unpack today. But we also want to consider how we can move towards solutions and implementing solutions on a catchment scale. So again, in the afternoon, we're going to be looking towards a bit of that interaction to see what comes next. This topic doesn't end today. We're very much interested in taking the conversation forwards. So we are going to be welcoming as much interaction as possible from you. So on that note, we are going to run some quick polls, and Emily is going to help me with this. So you can either join these using a smartphone and scan the QR code, or simply enter the URL slido.com and enter the event code RTAlgae25. And we're going to be quite quick with this as we're going to be introducing our keynote speech in just a few minutes. So first of all, hopefully this is all working correctly. I'm going to do it myself, but I would like to know where you are tuning in from today. And I will just run this for a minute and see what we come up with. So I'm really happy to see Northern Ireland quite high on the list there. Obviously, this has been a very prominent topic for you in recent years, so that's really good to see. Emily, have you entered? Because I know where you are.
Yes, I have. I'm waiting for the Wales percentage to go up, but
Have to go outside and bring in some more people. I'm just gonna
yeah, where is everybody from Wales?
move this off. I mean, you're doing better than Scotland, so that's
True.
something for us to work on in future years. And as an original Midlands girl, I'm slightly sad that the Midlands isn't more represented, but never mind. Let's move on before we incite a diplomatic incident. So our next question today is to help us get a bit of, a deeper understanding of who is joining us, who's present on the call. So if you could please select all of the relevant groups or sectors that apply to you. And we're very much aware that there will be a lot of crossover in this topic, which is why we're allowing you to select multiple options. For instance, clearly I'm in the Rivers Trust movement, but I also consider myself as a recreational river user, as someone who enjoys outdoor swimming and also things like kayaking when I get a chance. So what can we see here? Lots of government bodies. I think I did see lots of DEFRA, DERA representatives on the registration list, so that's really, really good. Although the Rivers Trust movement has just overtaken slightly. So that's also nice to see. Again, do need to move swiftly on. So just going to leave that there and move on to our next question, which is to share something memorable that you've seen by the river recently.
So it could be the good, the bad, the ugly. It could be anything from if you've seen people out and about enjoying the rivers, if there's a specific type of pollution that you were absolutely shocked to see. Yeah, we want to know.
Oh, there's some really interesting
Blue-green
answers
algae.
coming up here. Yeah, blue-green algae. It's nice to see kingfisher actually as the most prominent answer now. That's really cool. I think I've only seen a couple of kingfishers in my life, and kind of always
I've never
living in
seen
urban
one, so
areas.
I'm very jealous.
There you go. I love that someone saw a gold panner as well. That's kind of something I've always wanted to do, is a bit of mudlarking. Low levels in the river, that's interesting. I'd be curious to see in the chat where that was, given that, well, if you're in the UK or Ireland, we're just in early springtime, so slightly concerning if there are already low river levels there. And just to say a bit about kind of maybe why we've chosen this question for our interaction today is that the Big River Watch is coming up, which, if you don't know, is the Rivers Trust's Citizen Science Survey. It's an entry-level citizen science survey. It's free to enter. I say enter, it's not a competition. It's free to participate by downloading our app on your phone, and all you need to do is spend 10 to 15 minutes observing your local river and telling us what you see. So please do.
You cut out slightly, Becca, then. I was just going to quickly chime in and just because I missed the bit where you said it was the Big River Watch, but everything else we got. So just to mention that it was the Big River Watch that Becca was mentioning then.
Thank you, Emily, and sorry for cutting out there. Hopefully that does not happen again today. Let's see, just a few people left typing. I am going to close off the polling shortly as we need to move on. But yeah, really interesting mix of answers there, and I think it sets up some interesting questions for the rest of the day. So thank you for your participation so far. That's really fantastic. It's now time to properly get into the conference proper. So I'm going to ask Mark Horton, who is the All Ireland Director of the Rivers Trust and also CEO of Ballindery Rivers Trust in Northern Ireland, to introduce our keynote speaker. So over to you, Mark.
First mistake of the day. I started speaking with the mute still on. Yeah, thank you for introducing myself and also for introducing the conference to everyone. Welcome everybody from wherever you are around the world. As Becca said, my name is Mark Horton, and I am the All Ireland Director of the Rivers Trust. I'm also the Chief Executive of Ballindery Rivers Trust, which is a river that flows into Lough Neagh, and that's what we're going to start talking about this morning. And located right in the centre of Northern Ireland is Lough Neagh. It covers 392 square kilometres, and by comparison, that makes it slightly larger than the island of Malta. And it is our largest freshwater lake in both the United Kingdom and Ireland. It's an internationally important wetland and lake with a rich diversity of both resident and migratory wildlife. It also serves as a vital resource for fishing, navigation, and leisure activities, and it is deeply intertwined with the region's historical and cultural heritage and its people. It's also the source of 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water. But all of this is under threat. Over the last few years, Lough Neagh has attracted global attention for all the wrong reasons. As Becca mentioned, dense blooms of cyanobacteria, also known as blue-green algae, have covered the loch, impacting on its biodiversity and the services that the loch provides, as well as the communities that live around Lough Neagh as well. To explain this more, it is a great privilege that I introduce Minister Andrew Muir, Northern Ireland's Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Minister, a leader deeply committed to protecting Northern Ireland's environment and its vital ecosystems, as well as supporting a strong and sustainable agri-sector. At a time when the blue-green algae crisis in Lough Neagh poses significant challenges for our natural heritage, businesses and communities, Minister Muir has shown exceptional dedication in addressing this critical issue. Recognising the urgency of the situation, Minister Muir has championed innovative and collaborative approaches to reduce nutrient pollution, restore water quality, and to safeguard biodiversity in Lough Neagh, as well as taking decisive action by implementing and investing in the Lough Neagh Action Plan. His leadership extends beyond addressing the immediate concerns with a vision for sustainable solutions that will benefit future generations. Minister Muir is also a strong supporter and advocate of our work at the Rivers Trust and the local Rivers Trusts around Lough Neagh and across Northern Ireland and beyond. And his department supported the rollout, or is supporting the rollout, of non-regulatory agricultural advice, which we and other NGOs are giving to farmers in Northern Ireland, as well as grant support through the jointly developed Sustainable Catchments programme. Minister Muir's continued support for the work of the Rivers Trust is a testament to his commitment to unified action and environmental stewardship. So Minister Muir will now deliver our conference keynote address, sharing his insights and the progress made in tackling the blue-green algae crisis in Northern Ireland.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to contribute to the Rivers Trust annual conference today. I understand that this year's theme will focus on science behind blue-green algae blooms, their increasing prevalence and the systematic land and water management failures that contribute to their spread. I'm delighted to see that you will be hearing from leading scientists, policymakers and community representatives, exploring not only the challenges but also the potential solutions to mitigate future outbreaks. Moving on to the scope, scale, progress and challenges of Lough Neagh issues, you'll be aware that there are significant challenges ahead in relation to Lough Neagh and the need to ensure that we make the necessary changes to improve its water quality. Given that the problems of Lough Neagh have been decades in the making, I would stress that there is no quick fixes, unfortunately, in relation to Lough Neagh. It will take many years, if not decades, to see substantial recovery, such as the depth and complexity of the problem at Lough Neagh. You must also be alert to the fact that significant changes are needed across the entire Lough Neagh catchment area, and that the Lough Neagh Action Plan must go far beyond a localised approach. As you know, the Lough Neagh Report and Action Plan was led and developed by a joint DAERA Department for Infrastructure Water Quality Steering Group and was published in July 2024. You'll be aware that it contains science-led actions to tackle the blue-green algae blooms in Lough Neagh and secure longer-term improvements in water quality across Northern Ireland. To see these changes needed at Lough Neagh, every action within the action plan must be delivered and will require buy-in from across stakeholders and the public. Some of the interventions that are required are going to be challenging. I've been clear about this. This will be a difficult issue and there is going to be changes required in terms of our behaviours and practices. The action plan itself includes 37 actions, which with the majority of those contributed to the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, with also the Department of Infrastructure and the Department of Justice providing an input across a smaller number of overall actions. I'm pleased to report that implementation of the action plan is progressing, with governance structures, including the establishment of a Lough Neagh Programme Board, now in place, to closely monitor the action plan's progress and identify and apply corrective action if required. I am pleased to report that since the launch of the Lough Neagh Action Plan, progress has included the Lough Neagh Blue-Green Algae Small Business Research Initiative, otherwise known as SBRI. Phase 1 is progressing, with suppliers developing their proof of concept. At the conclusion of Phase 1, an assessment will be made on progressing to Phase 2 and commencing it in 25-26 financial year. The Sustainable Use of Livestock Slurry, which is otherwise known as SULS, another acronym, is a small business research initiative, and it's a programme which involves a key action in the Lough Neagh report. I'm supportive of this work and I'm delighted to see progress being made on each of the supported projects. The SBRI brings initiatives to the department and aims to advance and develop demonstration sites which, when fully operational, will have the potential to change the way nutrients are managed on farm. The Sustainable Utilisation of Slurry Phase 2 programme is already creating green jobs, stimulating innovation and delivering a cleaner environment and helping Northern Ireland make important strides on the road to net zero. The transformative practices being developed have the potential to deliver benefits for our climate, environment and agri-economy. In practice, some farmers are having their slurry separated, with the phosphorus-rich solid fraction being removed off farm and used as a feedstock for anaerobic digestion. This is the first step in reducing excess phosphorus being spread to land in Northern Ireland. In relation to the provision of water quality inspectors to enhance responses to reports of water pollution, work is continuing to recruit the enforcement and regulatory staff focused on the Lough Neagh catchment area. To date, 21 of these 28 posts identified have been filled, with training underway for these new staff. These posts include a range of monitoring, assessment, inspection and enforcement roles across a number of teams within the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. In relation to increased activity focused in areas of highest risk, my officials have been undertaking increased waterway inspections with several Lough Neagh catchments of concern. To date, over 100 sites have been assessed, with water quality, habitat and microinvertebrate analysis being undertaken to identify pressures on water quality within these areas. Several instances of pollution have been discovered, unfortunately, and have been referred for further action. I am also welcoming applications from the 2025 Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs PhD studentship competition, which closed on the 25th of February of this year. My department intends to fund a minimum of 3 Lough Neagh nature-based solutions studentships. In relation to commissioning science and developing a Lough Neagh science platform, my instruction to official includes delivering on a number of key areas, including development of an integrated data platform with modelling capacity for Lough Neagh and its catchments to inform policy directions and decision making. Research to develop an in-depth understanding of blue-green algae blooms and its impact has been underway, and this will inform future surveillance programmes. We're also doing further research in relation to microbial resistance in the environment. A call for research in my department, launched in 2024, is entering final stages of commissioning, with this research providing additional science focus in this summer of 2025. In relation to penalties and fines, an enforcement liaison group has been established to provide expertise and input to the preparation for the consultation on enforcement and fixed penalty notices, with an intention to issue a public consultation on this in the coming months. A 2-day strategic insight lab was held in March of this year to generate solutions and to establish a long-term vision for Lough Neagh over the next 20 to 30 years, to consider societal, environmental and economic perspectives and agree strategic and recommendations for the delivery of this vision. It included a broad range of stakeholders and brought together a diverse range of voices, expertise and perspectives, all of which are critical in shaping the future of Lough Neagh. I would like to share with you how my department has also been engaging and working collaboratively with the Rivers Trust through the Sustainable Catchment Programme. This is a key measure to help reduce the impact of agricultural activity on water quality. It is an initiative that I am very enthusiastic about, and I'm delighted to be working on the programme with. The Rivers Trust and the Northern Irish farmers are really involved in this scheme, and the Sustainable Catchment Programme currently covers 5 priority river catchments, which collectively represent a geographical spread across Northern Ireland. I am very encouraged by the work being carried out on the ground and the good relationships that are being fostered between the Rivers Trust and also with farmers. In May last year, I visited the Upper Bann catchment area to see the Sustainable Catchment Programme in action. I was really impressed by the work that's occurring on the ground to improve water quality and also the research that is being undertaken. It was great to see at first hand the collaborative catchment-based approach to water quality improvement being fostered and undertaken in conjunction with farmers. You may be aware that the Rivers Trust and the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute, otherwise known as AFBI, are working together using environmental data to target measures to the best effect, ensuring that the right measures in the right places are actually taking place. The detailed water quality monitoring is showing encouraging results, and it is also great to see the interest from farmers and high levels of uptake. Ideally, if we had infinite resources, which we would love, I would like to see the Sustainable Catchment Programme rolled out to all farms across Northern Ireland. That is my dream and that is my aspiration. However, given resource and budgetary restrictions, this is currently not feasible, and we will continue to use the targeted approach of the Sustainable Catchment Programme going forward. One of the actions the Lough Neagh Action Plan is to scope is the expansion of the Sustainable Catchment Programme. And this is something my officials are currently working with the Rivers Trust on. Whilst I acknowledge that water quality in Northern Ireland is a long-term issue for which there is no quick fixes, I am confident and determined that the work of the Sustainable Catchment Programme can deliver real results for Northern Ireland, particularly in the Lough Neagh catchment area. And this is something that I am very keen that we can progress over the time ahead. I firmly believe that a partnership-based approach where we all work together to meet the challenges of improving water quality, and thank the Rivers Trust for their contribution to the issue in Northern Ireland. Nature-based solutions are really important, and as you're aware, nature-based solutions are embedded in the requirements of the Climate Change Act. and that it is important to highlight that nature-based solutions are an integral policy and decision-making tool going forward. My department is already leading the way on this through the progress being made by my officials on the strategic objectives in the draft peatland strategy and the Forest for Our Future initiative. In the coming months, I am also hoping to launch a consultation on a new biodiversity strategy to be known as the Nature Recovery Strategy. This will aim to build upon many of the targets and objectives set out in the Environmental Improvement Plan, which was published last year. This document has involved many key stakeholders across sectors, including farming, local government, environmental, non-governmental organisations, and many, many more. And of course, DAERA, alongside other government departments. To be successful, the Environmental Improvement Plan actions will require a commitment across government and society to deliver that significant improvement that we need to deliver for our environment and also to achieve nature restoration. In conclusion, we are all on a shared journey to improve our water quality in Lough Neagh and its wider catchment area. This is not a challenge that any single organisation, sector or department can address alone, but it requires a collaborative, science-led and sustained effort from all of us. By working together, we can overcome challenges that may otherwise be seen as unsurmountable. Through collaboration, we can achieve an awful lot more, maximising impact and efficiency by pooling our resources and expertise, sharing insights and best practices that inspire, innovate and deliver. Stronger networks that extend beyond this forum have real benefits. Most importantly, by amplifying our collective voice to ensure issues facing Lough Neagh remain a priority is absolutely key. I'm delighted that the Executive has recently agreed the programme for government from 2024 to 2027, known as Our Plan, Doing What Matters Most. This contains the immediate priority of a commitment to protecting Lough Neagh and the environment. I have, however, previously stated that serious water quality issues at Lough Neagh were decades in the making and will unfortunately be decades in the fixing. Such is the nature of the issues that we are facing. It is sadly highly likely that we will yet again witness another reoccurrence of the blue-green algae blooms this year. In March last year, I stated that difficult interventions will be required to address the ecological and biodiversity crisis declared at Lough Neagh. I will continue to take the actions needed, coupled with sustained engagement to help turn the tide on water quality at Lough Neagh and elsewhere. I wish you a very successful conference and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Hey, sincere thanks from the Rivers Trust for that message from Minister Muir. I mean, I can say with first-hand experience that Minister Muir takes a very hands-on approach to the work that's going on around Lough Neagh and the wider environment and agri-sector in Northern Ireland. He actively chairs a lot of the meetings and attends a lot of the events that are going on around the planning for the resolution of the issues around Lough Neagh. But as he said, and as I'm sure we're all aware, these problems are complex, they are decades in the making, and as he highlighted, will take decades to fix and multiple partners coming together to find the solutions. So we're going to have a panel session now, a panel discussion, and I will be joined by 4 speakers who I'll introduce now. If they want to join me here in the conference room so everybody can see them. We're going to talk about lessons learnt from our experience on Lough Neagh and how these might be applied in other places. So the 4 guests on the panel this morning are firstly Bróna McNeill. Bróna is the Freshwater Development Officer at Northern Ireland Environment Link, working on advocacy, research and action to help improve the freshwater environment across Northern Ireland. Bróna has a background in law and policy, having previously worked as a lecturer in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast. She also currently chairs the board of the Environmental Justice Network Ireland. We're also joined by Joanna Braniff. Joanna is the All-Ireland Advocacy and Communications Manager at the Rivers Trust. She has over 25 years experience in journalism and communications and policy development. Joanna also currently chairs the Northern Ireland Freshwater Task Force and sits on the Department of Agriculture and Environment's reporting committee for the Lough Neagh Action Plan, led by Minister Muir, which you heard him speak about just. We also have Seáinín McNeill. Seáinín is the secretary of Ballindery Bridge Angling Club on the Ballindery River, one of the 6 major rivers that flows into Lough Neagh. He's also a trustee of Ballindery Rivers Trust, the Rivers Trust set up to care for and look after the Ballindery River. He's a keen angler and a conservationist and lives near the shore of Lough Neagh. And last but certainly not least, we have Michael Mahag. Michael is a nature-friendly farmer and ecologist who is actually farming within the Lough Neagh catchment. Having worked for the Northern Ireland Environment Agency as head of biodiversity and wildlife protection, Michael escaped, in his own words, to focus more on his passion of regenerative farming. And as an ecologist, Michael works closely with the farming community around Lough Neagh, preparing plans of action for farmers through the DERA environmental farming scheme. So those are the 4 panelists this morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us and for giving your time to the panel. I'm going to lead the discussion with questions, but I would encourage you to obviously interact with each other as well as part of the discussion. So first of all, I want to come to Seáinín as someone who lives near the loch. And I wonder if you could give us a bit of an insight from a local perspective on the importance of Lough Neagh to the communities that live around it and depend on it for their livelihoods, and also as a place of recreation.
Good morning. Thanks very much for the question. It's an interesting question. I suppose there's 2 points or 2 aspects to it that you could frame it around in terms of the ecological importance and then the economic importance of that Lough Neagh has. In terms of ecology, there's a lot of designations around it. It's an area of special scientific interest. There's a special protection area designation, and then Lough Neagh and Lough Beg. It's part of the Ramsar Convention. So that's the ecological aspect in terms of those designations, plus the important habitats, the plants and vertebrates, the fish and the wildfowl. The economic aspect of it, we have commercial fisheries on it. So for the Lough Neagh pollen and the Lough Neagh eel, which are harvested annually, as well as being designated as endangered species, that industry carries on. It's very important for our drinking water. Recreationally, Lough Neagh is very important in terms of the revenue that it generates. Trout and salmon being the backbone of the recreational sector, in addition to the coarse fishing, that generates, I think, in my opinion, from looking at decal stats over the years, probably in around 9, probably 10 million based on 2007 figures. I feel that that's at risk, and it's where do we go from here?
Yeah, and I think that is significant. It's that kind of economic piece of the puzzle, often unseen. The benefits that are derived from Lough Neagh that ripple out through the wider community and the wider economy of Northern Ireland, and it's hard to capture that. But a figure of 9 or 10 million pounds per annum is quite surprising. And I think that can't get lost in the whole conversation around Lough Neagh. I mean, the sight of the algae on the loch was obviously very distressing for people when it first appeared a couple of years ago. Of course, it's not the first time it's appeared. We've had it in the 1960s. I think, again, there were blooms in the 80s, and now, again, we're having these algal blooms. But can you describe the impact that has had on the lives of local people that live along the loch shore and the public generally?
Significant impacts. Some of the impacts are certainly adverse, and negative in terms of the medium impact would be the smell during the height of the algal blooms. It's a terrible smell. All the communities around the Lough Shore are very much aware of it and very often reported into their local councils to environmental health as potentially a smell of gas. Because I personally speaking, I've been out on the Lough 2023, and it wasn't good. So people are exercising caution.
So it
People are
smells like gas, like it smells like a
it's
gas leak, basically.
yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, it'd be very similar to that.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the methane or what's coming off it, but people are very worried. They're exercising caution. They're not going near the Lough Shore because of the risk associated with the algae blooms. People aren't letting their children near. People aren't letting their pets near. There's anecdotal reports of dead dogs, dead deer, and that was referred to in Queen's University Belfast research. So it's a sad state of affairs that you have this huge water body that could be used recreationally on a much better, bigger scale, but people are afraid to go near it. Reports of farmers fencing off the Lough Shore to protect their livestock and or just prevent
Been
cattle from going
drinking.
near it, and that's
Yeah.
unheard of.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, cattle would freely access the Lough Shore to get
Yeah.
drinking water. So the fact that farmers are preventing their livestock from getting into the water for fear of what would happen, and then I suppose then they're having to switch to a mains water supply, which has a cost. So, these are
Yeah.
all the knock-on effects, I suppose, that we're seeing around this crisis as it unfolds. And of course, the blue-green algae crisis is a crisis in and of itself, but is born out of a much bigger crisis, which is that we have, degraded water quality in Northern Ireland, well, across these islands. We also have a climate crisis. We have a declared climate crisis across the island of Ireland and Britain. Do you think that the degraded water quality and biodiversity on Lough Neagh is evident to the public?
Um, I think the water quality degrading is very evident. Um, During the height of the algae blooms, if you're in close proximity to the Lough Shore, it's green. Like it's a sickly green color. And then where that accumulates in bays, it forms dense mats. It's almost the consistency of mushy peas on a grand scale. But people see that and they are worried about it. But the biodiversity, that's a harder question to answer because there's so much influx in the loch at the minute. So whatever's going on in the aquatic environment, the general public's just not going to see. So if there's changes and if there are collapses in the food web, depending on what species are adversely affected and how all that changes, until you see the effects of that hypothetically in collapse of fish stocks, then it's probably too late. So the biodiversity part, you're not really going to see the further down the line. I think,
I think one of the things, and for those who are not familiar with Lough Neagh, there is what's referred to as the Lough Neagh fly, which is the chironomids that live in the loch, and they come up out of the loch in such numbers that they look like tornadoes, black tornadoes spiraling into the sky, millions and billions of flies, which are an important food source for the fish and for the wildfowl on the loch and so on. Have you noticed, because people would notice that, have you noticed any changes in the fly life around the loch that might be an indication that the biodiversity is in collapse?
Yeah. My perspective, my interpretation, say compared to 8 years ago, in March, you would have seen those clouds of midge above the trees and the hedgerows around Lough Neagh. And that's certainly less and less for this year in the past couple of years in terms of March. It's now April. You're only starting to see clouds of midge and they're small. Before, like anecdotally too, going back maybe even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, particularly 30 years ago, if you were driving anywhere near Lough Neagh, if your parents took you on a day out, at certain points the clouds of midge would be so dense, like you would have to stop and clean your window. but that
Okay.
hasn't occurred. So
Yeah. So there
it's
are those visible signs that things
that's
are
very
changing,
visible.
and
Yeah.
and that is what the people who live around Lough Neagh are going to notice. So, look, thank you for that really powerful insight into kind of what's happening around Lough Neagh and the real effect it's having on people. We'll come back to you, Seáinín, at the end. I want to ask your advice for the rest of the conference audience, but we'll move to Joanna. Joanna. Many times the question has been asked, who is to blame for the Lough Neagh crisis? Could it be argued that the crisis in Lough Neagh or Lough Neagh itself is a victim of the political instability in Northern Ireland? And has Northern Ireland and indeed the UK generally prioritised economy over environment, for which we're now all paying the price?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Seáinín. That certainly was a very powerful testimony. I mean, we can talk about this in the abstract, we can talk about the science, we can talk about the legals, but when you actually hear the living experience of it, it really brings home the seriousness of it. And as Seáinín said, you know, same memory that I have myself as a child of being taken to Lough Neagh, and it actually looked like smoke. It looked like plumes of smoke with the flies, and yeah, those bioindicators are certainly suggesting that we do have a serious problem. And you know, the question that you're asking there, who's to blame? In Northern Ireland, we love to have somebody to blame. In fact, so much so we actually have a TV program called The Blame Game, where everybody blames each other. But it's a very serious question, because I think it's important, maybe for people who don't understand the context of Lough Neagh and the politics around it. And you know, Lough Neagh is a very sad but a really good insight into what happens when the politics is not working and what that does to the environment. So yes, I would definitely say that Lough Neagh has been a casualty of the Troubles. And again, for people maybe who don't understand what we're talking about here, it was a civil conflict that was happening in Northern Ireland for more than 30 years. You know, and as we know, war and conflict, it impacts every part of society. So we have the indirect consequences of that with an impact on our environment. And what we're seeing here is a perfect storm. You know, the minister mentioned there, this was a disaster that was decades in the making. As we've talked about ourselves, it really is the perfect storm, because of the Troubles, you know, we had a shopping list of things which actually led to this perfect storm. So we were looking at, you know, chronic underinvestment in our water infrastructure because of the political instability, the finances. You know, people just weren't looking at that. The political priorities were always elsewhere. And, you know, the environment wasn't making it onto the headlines for 30 years. Because of that, we also have weak environmental governments. We have fragmented planning and not great oversight in terms of that. We haven't had a long-term political focus on the environment. And, you know, there are sometimes difficulties when it comes to that governance because of the divided communities. So I definitely think it's been a combination of factors, but the politics and the civil unrest has really put the environment on the back burner for us. So what has happened in Lough Neagh over the last couple of years has been a really serious wake up for us. You know, it really has showed us the impact of not taking account of the environmental protections. Also always because of our economics. We're an agricultural society where our economy is completely driven by agriculture. And again, that's something we need to take very seriously. You know, it's not something we can just turn around and say, oh, well, we can stop that so we won't have pollution in Lough Neagh. That it's so embedded within our society.
I think it's probably worth highlighting to listeners of the conversation that in Northern Ireland, we are a population of around 2 million people, and yet we produce enough food for 10 million people. So, you know, we're putting a lot of pressure on this bit of land, and we export the produce, but we don't export the waste. So therein lies a challenge for us in balancing economy with environment. And we probably haven't been great at doing that over the decades.
No, we're having to think the priority, because we were coming out of conflict, was very much about in support and building our economy and, you know, trying to create those economic opportunities. And unfortunately, that has been to the detriment of the environment. And I think, you know, we were getting away with it. And then the climate change or changing climate suddenly really began to ramp things up with us. And I think in Northern Ireland, we've almost had for many years, you know, well, we don't need to worry about climate change. That's nothing to do with us. Sure, it always rains here. We don't need to think about that. But now we're saying the always rains bit of it is what's kind of causing a lot of the problems, because there's so much pollution coming off the land. Now, what I've said there sounds incredibly depressing and negative. But what I would like to add to that is the fact that, you know, the example in Northern Ireland, we did solve an intractable problem. We solved a problem that we thought we could never solve in terms of societal conflict. So it shows us what capacity we have as a society to address problems and to come together and to find those solutions to the benefit of us all. So that's where I think the positivity within this lies, that I know as a society we can come together to solve these problems, and events and things like this allows us to share the learnings. But although it's been very negative for us, again, one of the positives out of this is we can share the learnings with people across the island of Ireland, across the world, basically, find solutions.
I think as well, you know, focusing on sharing learnings. When the kind of beginning of this most recent outbreak started a couple of years ago, there was a lot of fear, misinformation, disinformation around what was causing the crisis, the impact the crisis might have. You know, people were frightened to turn their taps on and drink the water, for example. Could you speak a little bit, you know, from your communications background, but also obviously as an advocate for the environment, tell us a little bit about how the information around the crisis unfolded and what lessons we can learn from that, because we do need to start now to change the narrative from blame to restorative action.
Yeah, so whenever we had the first major algal bloom in Lough Neagh, which I think was 2023, it was shock and awe. You know, it really was like a B movie, a horror movie, where the loch seemed to just suddenly turn green, and the whole of Northern Ireland, in fact, the whole of the world's attention was focused on it. We had the media arriving literally from all over the world. I was getting calls from like Al Jazeera journalists wanting to know about this, so it certainly attracted a lot of attention. And at that point, we didn't have a lot of science behind it in the public domain. We had the science, it just maybe wasn't communicated out into the public domain. And in a vacuum with such a dramatic backdrop, you know, that vacuum tends to be filled while people struggle to try and find solutions and to try and understand what is going on. We've seen this play out on across many crises, not just environmental crisis. So people were genuinely concerned, and they were turning to kind of online sources, and they were turning to other people within the community. And the science around this, as we're going to hear over the course of the day, and if anybody wants to have a look at the Lough Neagh Action Plan, which is available to download in the assets or in the resources button, the plan that the Minister was talking about, you know, that's a 37-point action plan with multiple parts within it. So it's a very, very complex situation in terms of both the causes and any potential, I'm not going to say cures for it, because it's not as straightforward as that, but any interventions in it. So the public were left kind of reeling and not really knowing what they should be talking about, what they should be looking at. And also the politicians were kind of caught out on it as well, because it is complicated science. So from our perspective, for us, it was a very steep learning curve as well. Luckily, with the support of our experts in the Rivers Trust, we were able to get up to speed very quickly with it. So at the time when the crisis first happened, we proactively put out a kind of fairly simple layperson's user guide to what blue-green algae is. And we actually also used that opportunity to promote the importance of the loch. So we included the statistics. I think a lot of people didn't even realise the size and expanse and the global importance of Lough Neagh. I mean, that whilst it's supplying, and again, worth noting, over 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water, it's a globally important site. We are supposed to be there in stewardship of that. We owe that to the world. So we had to kind of move in very quickly with information do a lot of connecting with communities, connecting with our local trusts, putting out information, contacting journalists, providing the science and data, and trying to be a calm, trusted voice within what was a very noisy news environment while people were looking for solutions. And again, we did try to take that solution-orientated, collaborative, community-based approach, which I think is
So I think that's it. I think the message is that, you know, you need to communicate science in a way in which people can understand it.
Yes.
And they are complex issues, but they do need to be explained. Everybody has the capacity to take in the information as long as it's presented in a way that is consumable. And I think that certainly is the lesson we learned from that. I want to move on to Michael. Michael, as a farmer on Lough Neagh, you'll be painfully aware that the farming community were largely singled out as being, you know, the problem on Lough Neagh. Of course, there are lots of other problems. We know that farming is under severe pressure at the moment in terms of profitability, the amount of legislation that farmers have to comply with. As a farmer yourself, what information and support do you think farmers need so that they can make that just transition towards water-friendly or more sustainable farming while still being able to make a profit?
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everybody. Great inputs, Joanna and Seáinín. That's really good to hear those perspectives. I think, again, a little bit of context is important here, and we've talked about some statistics. There are 1.3 million acres of farmed land within the Lough Neagh catchment. Huge area. And that's just in Northern Ireland, because the Lough Neagh catchment is an international catchment. It crosses over into the Republic of Ireland. And there is another 10% or so of land that's farmed in County Monaghan. We reckon within that area, there's somewhere in the region of 13,000 farm businesses. Northern Ireland has a lot of small farms, small base farms. The average size of a farm is 100 acres. So that's a kind of an overview. The statistics coming from the department, their department, is saying that 62% of the phosphate, which is the main driver of the algal blooms, coming into Lough Neagh annually, is coming from farm sources. The rest is wastewater treatment, septic tanks, and other industry.
Yep. So
if we look at it from that perspective, yeah, there's a very large problem there. And agriculture, the statistics show, and they don't lie, show that there is a large amount of nutrient excess coming from our land. Now, the way that our farms in Northern Ireland have worked over the years, we have had a lot of incentive, really big incentive to intensify. And we have a very successful farming industry because of that. You alluded to the amount of protein that's produced and the amount of protein that's exported. You know, an excess of somewhere in the region of food enough to feed 8 million people. Some of the folk watching this today in other parts of the United Kingdom will be availing of that. But the waste is there, and the tons upon tons upon tons of slurry and farm waste or farm nutrient that is available there is causing the big problem. And this has been going on for a long time. The minister did say it's been a long time in the making. Cores going into the limnology and the basal muds in Lough Neagh show that over the decades and over the long period, there has been a build-up of phosphate. And so with all of this in our system, with the constant flow of more and more nutrients into the system and in through our rivers and catchments, it is a difficult situation for the farming community to suddenly change what they're doing. How can you? You're based around systems of ensuring that you're meeting the production requirements, the production demands, the food chain systems that are there, and that's where we are. And indeed, if sudden changes were to be made, catastrophic changes were to be made, taking any sort of American deal coming out of the background in terms of food supplies. But if sudden changes were to be made, this would have a very big impact on the farming community and on the whole structure of land management. But while farmers can be seen and can be pointed to as being part of the problem around Lough Neagh, we are going to have to be, and we will be, with the right support, part of the solution to it, because that's the only way a solution can be found, is for at catchment scale marginal changes and improvements to be made over time that will reduce the flow. And I think the two of the most important things that can help with that is just the awareness and the information that has been put out, that is going out to the farming community through various agri-environment schemes, but also through the media, and is identifying that there are issues there. No farmer that I've ever spoken to wants to be part of a business that is causing such a large-scale pollution and large-scale difficulty. They want to, and I genuinely see this. They want to be part of a solution, but they're not really sure yet what to do, how to do it, and where to go about it. But there's a willingness there, and in fact, evidence of that is that under the environmental farming scheme, our agri-environment scheme in Northern Ireland, over the last 9 years, out of the 13,000 farmers within the Lough Neagh catchment, almost 2,000 carried out water quality prescriptions under the environmental farming scheme. Enough bankside fencing was carried out on tributaries of Lough Neagh that would fence from Ireland from top to bottom and left to right across the island, and more left over. So there was a vast amount of fencing carried out to start that process, putting in 2 and 10 meter, 2 meter and 10 meter buffers. Now, still 80% of the farmers were not engaged in that, but that's a voluntary scheme, and it was a scheme that was in place in the early stages of the Lough Neagh crisis coming to the fore. So there are positive works that are happening, but of course there have to be initiatives that take that further forward. There has to be something that can be done. It can't be that the government has been encouraging through business grants, through other things, intensification in farming, and then suddenly turn around and say, well, you're the problem, you've got to sort it out, and not have a system there, a grant system, support system there to make sure that any transition that is identified will be working forward. Now, one of the things that has been incredibly helpful, and again, people within Northern Ireland will know this, but maybe not outside of the country, and that is that at the moment the Department of Agriculture is running a soil nutrient health scheme, and within this, over 4 years, every single agricultural field in Northern Ireland will be soil sampled, and farmers will get an indication of the nutrients in their soil, phosphates, nitrates, other chemicals. And along with that, there is a LiDAR survey that shows where the runoffs are on each field. So where's the drainage, the surface drainage in that field? And these are very, very powerful data. Three of the 4 areas have been covered. There's a 4th section to be surveyed this year. And what that is showing is that our fields are pretty much saturated with phosphate, very high in nutrients, and that actually spreading fertilizer in the fields, artificial fertilizer in the fields, is a bit of a waste. It's a waste of money for the farmers because the soils just don't have the capacity to absorb it anymore. And so I think a very important thing is that this information is getting out to the farming community. There needs to be more communication to the farmers and landowners, because tradition in farming everywhere is a big thing. I think farmers feel that, it's springtime, the grass hasn't quite started to grow yet. If I put on a lot of NPK onto the fields, that will give it a big boost, without really realizing that within the structure of our fields and in the soils, it just cannot absorb anymore. And what happens when the rain eventually comes after this dry spell? That will run off and it'll be back into our rivers and lakes. And then the other thing, of course, is that Lough Neagh, while 6 major rivers drain into it, only 1 river flows out. So all of that nutrient-rich water is actually flowing out into another SAC, SPA up on the north coast of Northern Ireland. So the issue doesn't just stop at Lough Neagh, it carries on.
I think the key lesson out of this is that farmers need that support and advice, and it's often non-regulatory support that they need in order to make the decisions to put the right measures in the right places. And I want to go to Bróna, and I know that Becca, who is looking after the agenda, won't thank me for this, but I'm going to beg for 5 minutes grace. She'll tell me off later, because I want to hear from Bróna. Bróna, we've just heard that we're going to get money invested in Lough Neagh in the budget. We've got an action plan. But are we at risk of going round in circles with plans? Because surely the first and second cycles of the Water Framework Directive should have put plans in place for us to address these key problems. You're on mute, Bróna. You have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Sorry, that's not helping the time situation.
Yeah,
and thanks to the other panelists. It's been really interesting to hear the different perspectives. I think, are we at risk of going round in circles? Possibly. I mean, like, of course, we heard from Minister Muir earlier today about the range of different actions, the Lough Neagh Action Plan, and as you mentioned there, the kind of the funding that we're getting through. And all of that is welcome, obviously. But we also have to take account of the fact that there's been a real proliferation of different initiatives. So some of these linked to the Lough Neagh Action Plan, some of these coming from academia, some of these coming from other community groups. And I suppose the danger is that there's a lot of talking happening about Lough Neagh, but that might lead to sort of duplication of effort and potentially even kind of conflict in terms of deciding what the problems are and where we need to direct the resources. So I guess, yes, there's a risk of going around in circles. In terms of the Water Framework Directive, in theory, also, yes, this should have helped to improve water quality. That's the whole purpose of the Water Framework Directive, and the whole kind of architecture of governance that it puts in place is to improve water quality and avoid us getting into these situations. But we know that there have been really serious problems with implementation of the Water Framework Directive in Northern Ireland. There was an OEP, Office of Environmental Protection report last year that set some of these problems out. So some of the problems are that there aren't clear environmental objectives for specific water bodies. And that means that we don't have clear programs of measures that need to be put in place to achieve those objectives. So all of those kinds of problems, and there's obviously been a delay in publishing the 3rd River Basin Management Plan as well. And the result of that is that, as we heard, water quality in NI is just going in the wrong direction. So we're there's a danger now that we're actually not going to meet. In fact, we almost definitely won't meet the targets that have been set out in terms of improving water quality. So both the OEP and the NI Audit Office have already set that out. So the publication of the 3rd River Basin Management Plan is, I understand, is now waiting for executive approval. And it will be interesting. We'll be looking at that very, very closely to see if lessons have been learned from the experiences of Lough Neagh, and the kinds of things that we'll be looking out for within that 3rd River Basin Management Plan. Are there specific targets? Are there clear environmental objectives for specific water bodies? So I suppose one of the lessons we've learned is that we now have a kind of set of criteria. So we know what it is that we need that River Basin Management Plan to contain. And so it kind of helps us to sort of to decide whether or not it includes what we need it to.
Absolutely. And there's lots of plans sitting on shelves that need to be dusted off and amalgamated together. And finally, could you give us the elevator pitch, let's say, on your thoughts around, from your kind of environmental justice background, how could we capitalise, let's say, on participatory democracy to harness the energy that's existing at the minute around people's concern for the water environment? What can we learn from other places to improve on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can refer people, without talking about it in too much detail now, to a briefing paper that I published with my colleague from EGNI about talking about Lough Neagh as a case study in environmental justice. So you've talked about participatory democracy, so procedural justice, which is the right that people have to contribute to environmental decision making. That's a key component of the kind of broader environmental justice picture, I suppose. So I can share that resource with attendees if they're interested. I suppose in order to kind of capitalize on that energy, the key piece of advice I would give is to organize. So if communities are facing kind of similar issues to some of the ones that have been raised at Lough Neagh, it's be clear about what is needed, agree what's needed, be clear about what you're asking for, and be clear about who it is that you need to ask that from. So it's being clear and specific about what you need and who you need it from. That would be my...
Do you think there's a role for things like citizens' assemblies, for example, to give people more of a powerful voice around what needs to be done?
Yeah, undoubtedly so. And I'm just going back to what I said about that kind of proliferation of different initiatives around Lough Neagh and what should be done. Like one of the reasons why that has happened is possibly because there's a frustration, there's a lack of existing mechanisms for people to feed in to this decision making. And we have to remember that it's not just about harnessing energy, that like local energy and drawing on local knowledge of ecosystems, which is of course incredibly important in order to like actually develop sustainable solutions. But it's not just a nice to have. There's actually we have rights, right? Under the Aarhus Convention, we have the right to contribute to environmental decision making. So this isn't just like a nice to have, it's a legal requirement. And so there's a really important kind of set of considerations about what mechanisms could actually be put in place. And I agree with you that a citizens' assembly on Lough Neagh is one possibility that might fulfill that function.
So I want to thank all of you, all four of you, for your contribution. It's been absolutely fantastic. I hope it's been very insightful for the audience of the conference. I think there's already calls, Bróna, for you to share your report. So we'll put that in the assets for the conference. And we're going to go back to Becca now, who won't thank me for having destroyed her conference agenda at the outset. But I'm sure we'll make up the time later because I think it was a very valuable conversation. So Becca, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. And yes, all the best plans go to waste, don't they? But no, that was agreed, a really brilliant discussion. So thank you to everyone for contributing. If you are able to hang around, there are loads of questions in the Q&A box and also I think quite a lot of comments in the chat. So feel free to be answering those, all our Lough Neagh panelists. Thank you. I'm going to ask our panelists for the ripple effects session to come through now. And I'm really happy to introduce our chair for the session. Hannah Burgess is the president of the Chartered Institute for Water and Environmental Management. And I also know that Hannah is fresh off her own presidential conference that took place was it Coventry, wasn't it, yesterday? So the Midlands, it's already been highlighted in the chat, is another area that has been affected by the issue of algal blooms. So I will hand over to you without taking any more time, but thank you to everyone.
Yes, no problem. And thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me to take part in this session. So I'm going to introduce the speakers briefly before we move on to the discussion session. And I'd like to remind people to use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we can look at those and try and put those to the speakers as well, given the time that's allowed. I think we will run slightly over into the break, which Rebecca has told me is allowed, to allow time for this session as well. So good morning, everyone, and I'm delighted to welcome the panelists this morning, which are James Wallace, who's the Chief Executive Officer of River Action UK. Good morning, James.
Morning.
Graham Thomas, who's a Team GB rower. Good morning, Graham.
Good morning.
Ellen Bradley, who's the co-director of UK Youth for Nature. Good morning, Ellen. and Ellie Roxburgh, who is from Sustainable Nitrogen Alliance. And good morning,
Morning.
Ellie. And the aim of this session is to allow us to further examine the contributing factors and impacts of algal blooms. And I'm really pleased to invite such a diversity of speakers to take part in this session. So our first question, and we'll come to you first, James. So we'll go in the order that I introduced the speakers, to explain a bit about your position and background and how it relates to algal blooms.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm Chief Executive of River Action. My background is as an archaeologist and ecologist, and I've spent the past 25 years setting up environmental organisations, or in this case, helping Charles Watson set up River Action. And the past 10 years have been really about water. Very interesting to hear about the Lough Neagh conversation. I'm fascinated to listen in on that. Something that really struck me with this conversation with you now is the need to address the really major underlying drivers behind algal blooms in Britain and Northern Ireland. This is predominantly down to an international industrial business model. And we mustn't forget that, I would suggest. Bearing in mind agricultural pollution in England and Wales accounts for around half of the pollution in our waterways, about 40% on average, but in places like the River Wye, I'm about to come to, a lot more. And there's a driver behind this. We have Cargill, the America's biggest food corporation, dressed up as Avara in this country, with 25 million chickens on the Wye catchment alone, a planning system that's broken, and a river that's dying. And I totally understand why a farmer with a small farm would be struggling for an income and would be drawn to running a factory farm instead. Totally understand that. The economic drivers are very considerable, very, very considerable. However, as far as wildlife is concerned and human health, it is having a massively detrimental effect, which is why organisations like ours are undertaking legal actions, but also trying to work with farmers to encourage a transition to a more just way of agriculture and regenerative way of agriculture that will lead to reduction in algal blooms and the restoration of the river. So River Action is trying to come from a position of helping to work with community stakeholders, including farmers, citizen scientists and so on, to try and address these issues constructively with the regulators like the Environment Agency and the NRW in Wales, and with the new government to try and help them to see this as a top priority. I mean, after all, what is more important than food and water?
Thank you very much, James. A great introduction. If we can come to you next, Graham. So just a reminder, if you can explain a bit about your position and background and how it relates to algal blooms.
Hello, yeah, thanks for having me on. So yeah, as a rower of over 15 years now, I've made the waterways of the country my office, and I also have a background in biomedical science. So my passion is always to try and take a scientific look on things. I'm furthering my own understanding by doing an MSc in management and sustainability, but I think my main role currently is more of a social, creating a momentum about the issues that we're raising. And obviously blue-green algae is regularly flagged, particularly it is raising rowing, but more for sports where people are actually in the water, such as triathlon, but we tend to share the same bodies of water. So it's about mobilizing that group of people. Obviously all the time we've got new people coming into the sport, and we don't want their events to be cancelled. We want them to be able to complete their event, fall in love with the water we have in this country, which is fantastic, and then become advocates for better infrastructure, better and more clean water. Yeah, so that's it from my side.
Thank you. I very much like the idea of having with us as your office. So what a fabulous thing to have. Okay, if we can move on to you next, Ellen.
Yeah, also very jealous of Graham's office. That sounds way nicer than mine. Hi, I'm Ellen. My background is in biology, and I'm co-director of UK Youth for Nature, which is a network of 16 to 35-year-olds from across the UK. And we're a campaigning organisation, and our campaigning style is very creative and I would say pretty positive. What we're trying to do is facilitate really positive conversations between young people and decision makers. And one of our kind of key campaigns at the moment is one called Not So Freshwater, which is focusing on agricultural pollution in freshwater systems. So we host political receptions and try and set up meetings between young people and MPs. And we do that in a really fun way. So one of our receptions was called a chemical cocktail bar, where we had cocktails that people could drink, but they were called things like gin and Thames and Tyne Sunrise and all that kind of stuff. And I might talk a bit more about that later, but thank you so much for having me.
I'm kind of hoping that they were real cocktails with alternative names.
Yes, yeah. They were safe to drink.
Safe to drink. Thank you, Ellen. And over to you, Ellie.
Thanks, Hannah. So I work at the Soil Association and I convene the Sustainable Nitrogen Alliance, which is a coalition of health, climate, nature and farming organisations that are advocating for the government to take greater action on nitrogen pollution. So we work alongside River Action in doing that. Nitrogen alongside phosphorus is a primary driver of algal blooms and water systems. But the reason we focus on nitrogen is because it takes many forms, which contribute to water pollution, climate change, air pollution, ozone depletion and biodiversity loss. So nitrogen management needs to consider all of these impacts together. So really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much all. So we'll move on to our first question that follows on. So we'll come to you in the same order, unless one of you thinks you've got something that you want to follow on from a point that someone has just made, in which case do jump in. So from your perspective and your organisation's perspective, what concerns you most about algal blooms? So if we can come to you first, James.
Well, I'm going to use the Y throughout as an example because it's probably in England and Wales the best known example for agricultural pollution causing algal blooms. That is not to in any way suggest that, say, for example, the Windermere Lake is not a candidate for that accolade too. On the River Wye, we have about 3,000 tonnes of excess phosphate, according to Lancaster University's Refocus report, coming into the catchment. And this is just not sustainable. So if you can imagine that being spread on fields that don't need it, in many cases, the fields have up to 7 years of legacy phosphates and therefore have no need for additional nutrients. And those are then washed into the waterways and cause eutrophication and that lead to algal blooms. And this is, sorry to say, but snuffing out the light and the life for the river. What concerns us, therefore, is this pressure on the ecology is leading to the rapid demise of the Atlantic salmon run. I mean, we're talking about if we use catches as a measure of success of a healthy ecosystem, we're talking about one that is close to extinction level. And this isn't only in the River Wye, by the way, this is happening elsewhere in the country too. Key species like ranunculus, the water crowfoot, where invertebrates hide away from predators and where from predators have as a nursery, are vanishing too. And then indicator species like kingfisher, even mute swans and so on, are rapidly declining. I paddled on the river with my family 5 years ago and we swam in it too. And I remember retching at the smell. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It is quite disgusting, very similar to we've just heard with the methane gas at Lough Neagh in the previous conversation. So if we add that all up, it's a catastrophe, and it's also affecting people too. It's affecting people who run ecotourism businesses or other businesses on the catchment. It's affecting people's well-being and access to the water, and it's therefore no wonder that we're actually seeing a legal action led by Lee Day, in which over 2,000 claimants are complaining against Avara, the predominant business responsible for this, and also, interestingly, Dear Cymru, the water company. It's the first time a legal action is being taken against both main pollution causes. So let's talk about the carrot version of this. It's not just about, nobody wants to beat up farmers. Let's get this right. We need food. Farmers are absolutely essential to our communities and our security for the future. But we have an insidious business system that's unfortunately upsetting our ecological balance and our economy. So what about the carrots? There are, we heard in the previous conversation, river buffers, slurry management grants, ELMS payments, SFI. There's a whole long list of these things. There are beavers, dare I say it, and buffers that could help reduce the amount of pollution that could come into rivers. We have loads of things that we could do to support farmers, and that's really where River Action's coming from. We don't want to take legal action. That's the last thing we want to do. It's very expensive and it rarely works, and that doesn't make anybody happy. On the other hand, how can we have a transition to sustainable agriculture? That's what we'd really like to see.
Okay, thank you very much, James. And I think one of the things you've highlighted there is a challenge with the fact that there are lots of initiatives that are already out there. how do you knit them together into an overall strategy? Okay, if we move on to yourself, Graham, then in terms of what concerns you most about algal blooms.
I think it's the barrier for participation. As I said in my introduction, we want people to enjoy all the wonderful, what I call my office. I want everyone to, it's their recreation time. And I remember that it was probably the first thing I learned about water as a child, with my mum saying, "No, you don't go in there. There's blue-green algae," and that's always stuck with me. It's probably, we talk about nitrates and phosphates in the water, but that doesn't always resonate with everybody. But I think most of the general public have heard of blue-green algae. Perhaps they don't understand the science behind it, but it's a really great way. Well, sadly, it's a great way of engaging people on what is going on with our watercourses when you can say its presence is there. And yeah, I'm a kind of a one-man band, just banging my drum. I don't work for anybody else, so yeah, I've not much more to add than I just want people to be able to enjoy their natural spaces, and blue-green algae is a big barrier to that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Ellen, from your perspective and your organisation's perspective, what concerns you most about algal blooms?
I definitely echo everything that Graham has just said about it being a barrier for people. I'm a very keen outdoor swimmer, so the idea that we are polluting habitats so much that people can no longer use them, I find that really upsetting. From a UK Youth for Nature perspective, it's obviously going to be about the wildlife. Freshwater ecosystems are really, really important. They hold so much diversity in the UK, and we've got something like 85% of the world's chalk streams just in England. And I've seen somebody in the chat talking about freshwater pearl mussels, which are one of the species that are impacted by algal blooms. And they're absolutely amazing. They can live for well over a century. They spend the first 9 or 10 months inside the gill of a fish, which just kind of blows my mind. And they're one of the reasons that Julius Caesar wanted to invade the UK, because he really liked pearls. So all of this incredible wildlife has so many amazing cultural ties that if we lose that, I think that's really upsetting for people and for society, because if we lose the connection with these environments, people are going to care less, and then that's a really worrying kind of message for the future of these ecosystems as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ellen. And Ellie, over to you.
Thanks, Ellen. That's such a lovely story, something you should definitely be communicating. For me, it's the extent to which so many rivers are damaged. It's the direction that the government is going in, the lack of clear solutions. This government is focusing its water bill almost entirely on the water sector, which demonstrates that it's not really recognising, that the water sector definitely has a place in fixing what's going wrong. But, the number of intensive livestock units is going up, as is the use of synthetic fertilizer. Yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be done to manage this. And yeah, well, I'll come on to the Riverway Action Plan as well. But yeah, that's what concerns me.
Okay, thank you very much. And what I'm hearing in what you've just said is obviously a lot of the political pressure has been on water companies, and a lot of those will be point sources of pollution, that actually diffuse sources of pollution, that bigger picture and catchment management is really important to actually resolving the issue as a whole. So on that point, I'd like to move on and think about policy and milegislation. And in terms of what policy and legislative changes do you think are needed to help address the issue? I might just, because I've thrown in a question that we talked about previously, but it's maybe not next on the list. Maybe I'll just decide who wants to take that first, rather than put someone on the spot.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one.
Thanks, Ellie.
So something that we're calling for as the Sustainable Nitrogen Alliance is more catchment management, which works with farmers to limit the amount of nitrogen that they're putting on their soil. Because at the moment, the average nitrogen use efficiency, that's how much nitrogen is put on that's actually used by the crops. So for crop production, it's 55%, and that reduces to between 9 and 30% for livestock production. So the rest of that nitrogen is lost to the environment. And this is kind of similar to what Michael was talking about in the last panel. There's a lot of knowledge that needs to be shared with farmers. There's a lot of support and training in how to manage nutrients better. But what we'd like to see is all of these different strategies that the government is working on, relating to planning, relating to farming support, relating to land use, all working together at the catchment scale to look at how damaged are these rivers already and what can they possibly manage. And if it means that they can't manage the pollution from more intensive livestock units, then you say, okay, we can't have any more of those here. That's the kind of thing we'd love to see, and more connection between local government and central government.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ellie. And a really good reflection there on almost how do you take a risk-based approach and then address that across a catchment to try and manage existing levels of pollution, but also try and stop those increasing further through using the planning system, for example. Okay, if we come on to you next, James.
Well, thanks. There's something called the Farming Rules for Water. They've been in place since 2018, and they haven't been used once for farm pollution. The only time they have been was for the outrageous vandalism done on the River Lough, which resulted in a gentleman being imprisoned, rightly so, for completely and utterly destroying the river, which I'm sure many people on this call will remember. But for actual pollution, it has not been used a single time. It's an advisory system where the guidance from DEFRA to the Environment Agency has been, and to NRW, has been one of non-enforcement. And it means that currently the likelihood of you being inspected, even with some replacement inspectors having been lost years ago with 70% funding cut, the chances of being inspected is once in 25 to 50 years. And you'll probably just get a little letter to say, would you mind just tidying up? Which is not a threat. Now, again, just to emphasize the point, none of us, we certainly don't want to be using enforcement as a tool to incentivize change, but we do have laws that are not an option. They need to be enforced. We had a judicial review last year in February, which was around this subject about enforcing the farming rules. The guidance is meant to now have changed. It hasn't yet. The OEP are looking into it, and so on. We have just recently a court case in Herefordshire where River Action challenged and intervened with the National Farmers Union, which now means that manure needs to be treated as waste in law. Again, this is not an option. It needs to be enforced. So our question would be, how are you, the government, going to do that? And then from a carrot point of view, then we've already mentioned elms, for example. Where's the money going to come from? In the election, I think one party asked for an extra billion. Or in fact, a couple of parties asked for $1 billion or more. The current government decided to freeze and stick with where things are, which is actually a real terms cut when you look at inflation. So how are you as a farmer meant to make that transition to regenerative agriculture and to have better slurry management if, for example, your grant for a slurry scheme requires you to put about half the funding in? And if you're a tenant or have a short hold agreement, how on earth do you do that? You literally have nothing to mortgage, so you cannot do it. So again, we're not blaming the farmers at all. It's the system that's broken. And then finally, we need to look about what we pay for our food. If we have chickens that cost £3.50 in Tesco's, then it's setting an unrealistic expectation on what is a fair and reasonable price for a farmer to receive, and also the price of that life and its impact on the environment. So it's a complicated system, but it's all resolvable.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you've picked up there, not only on policy and legislation, but also funding and what I might call willingness to pay as well. Okay, so Graham and Ellen, do you have anything further you'd like to add from your perspectives?
I don't think so. I think that was well covered.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, so it's small changes. Yeah, that if we can, again, it's like there's obviously a few people doing great social media campaigns and education, but the more we can get the base of the pyramid aware of how they're purchased, like you only get one vote at the ballot box, but if you can get everybody to vote every time they spend their money on making a more conscious decision, then I think that has a bigger impact. And we'll leave the hard-hitting stuff, the heavy-hitting stuff to James and everyone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next question, and I'll come to you first, Ellen, on this one. The question is to all the panelists. Can you share any good examples of collaborative work to deliver environmental improvements that reduce the risk of algal blooms?
Yeah, so I touched on the chemical cocktail bar earlier, but I think it's a really excellent example of different organizations coming together with kind of different areas of expertise. So this was a political reception. I've mentioned the cocktails. Each of them came with a little recipe card, and the recipes said things like take 3 different types of pesticide, add a dash of fertilizer, shake well, add flame retardant to finish. It was entirely backed up by science. So the Rivers Trust monitored the rivers. They told us the different chemicals that they found in there. UK Youth for Nature packaged it up into something really creative. We had these recipe cards with some youth artwork on there, and on the back we had our policy asks. And at this reception, we were handing them to the MPs, and it created a really, this sounds weird for a political reception, but a really fun, positive atmosphere to talk about something that is not very fun and can be pretty dull and not very inspiring. But actually bringing that little bit of creativity from the youth aspect and the policy and the scientific experience from the different organisations was a really effective way of campaigning for change and policy. And off the back of that, we've had loads of meetings with various MPs following up to talk about chemical pollution in rivers. So I think if organisations that have different skill sets can come together, I think that's a really powerful way of creating change.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ellen, I'm wondering if any of that information is online. I'm quite interested in those chemical cocktail recipes myself, but obviously to recreate them with drinkable elements in them. Okay, so who else would like to take that question in terms of sharing good examples of collaborative work to deliver improvements? James.
If we use the River Wye as an example, and you know, Ellie, Soil Association, River Action, the Wildlife Trust, Rivers Trust, you know, there's a huge group of organisations. Then there's all the communities themselves. There's Friends of the Wye, Say the Wye Coalition, and so on. I mean, literally, I'm not exaggerating, dozens. And what we've seen over the course of the past 5 years or so is the coming together around an incredible research programme, which is actually working and being used. Now, I know we're some way from healing the river. That is taking time. But as far as evidence and working constructively with agriculture, with industry, with the EA and NRW, we have an online system called WYEVIZ, WYEVIZ, which I highly recommend people look at. It's, I think, probably the most advanced catchment scale system for reporting pollution at a citizen level. And if I use just the 28th of March as an example, the Worm Brook, beautifully named stream, had a huge pollution incident on it. Citizen scientists flocked down there, did up and downstream monitoring and worked out exactly where the source was. The Environment Agency were engaged and they were able to go to the source and deal with it. So we have a real-time example, literally in the past week or so, where we have citizens working with farmers, working with regulators to try and help resolve the problem. And if we extend that across the nation, we have the Rivers Trust movement, for example, where we see thousands of people, Earthwatch likewise, thousands of people going out and doing testing. The tragedy is we shouldn't be required to do this. This problem shouldn't exist and citizens shouldn't have to go and do the government's work. I mentioned briefly, very briefly, a minute ago about government cutbacks. With the previous 15 years, we were looking around 70% funding costs cut from monitoring and enforcement. And they've been returned a little bit, but nowhere near enough. So I can't emphasize enough myself that River Action and many others probably on this call now would love to see the government actually give the teeth back to regulators, but also the hug with it, you know, that how can we help farmers make the transition?
Yeah, and I think that's really important here. This isn't about a blame game. This is about saying, okay, where are the multiple sources of pollution coming from, and how can we all work together to address this? What funding do we need? What political support do we need to address this? Okay, thank you. So we've got about 4 minutes left of this session. It's gone remarkably quickly. So I'd like to come to all of the panelists and ask you a question here, which is, from your perspectives, what's the biggest thing that needs to change to unlock progress in addressing algal blooms? I'll let you decide who wants to take that first.
I think from a sort of campaigning and community engagement perspective, Graham's kind of touched on this earlier, that algal blooms are very visual. People know about them. It's not like PFAS pollution. You can see it, people can get behind it. And I think we should use that and engage the wider public and really push for change and show that people care about this. Because on a warm summer's day, you get so many different types of people going down to the river for a picnic and a swim. And it might be that one of the handful of times a year that some people go out and actively connect with nature. So I think this is a really strong opportunity for us to push for kind of a societal change and a societal desire to do good for the environment. So I think if we can all collectively work to engage different communities, I think that would be great.
Thank you. And what I'm hearing there is also something around people valuing water as a resource, not only that comes into their homes, but in the wider environment as well. Who'd like to go next?
I'm happy to go next.
Thanks, Ellen.
I'd like to see, I touched on this earlier, but more training and advice for farmers to support better nutrient management and more connection across the government strategies with catchment level nutrient budgets to inform those on that risk-based approach I touched on earlier.
Okay, thank you. Graham or James?
Go on, I'll go. I'm sure James has got something well thought out to say. Yeah, it's similar. It's get everyone at the bottom of the pyramid, you know, making informed choices as consumers, and then also, as Ellen's already said, falling in love with their natural spaces. And you know, if it's the first time that somebody visits a watercourse, you want it to be a good one. You want it to be one that they remember, they cherish, and that each time they return, they become even more of an advocate for it. Maybe they see some wildlife they'd not seen before. And at the moment, we're on a bit of a downward spiral with seeing less and less. And so we really need to do something to engage people now before they don't even know what they're missing out on. So yeah, it's people power, essentially.
Definitely. And I think you've raised a brilliant point there about people's buying power, because I know certainly from a personal perspective, I think about that from a carbon element, thinking I want to buy local produce wherever possible, but I don't suppose I've ever really thought about that from that wider kind of catchment element. And I'm wondering in future how we can increase public awareness in that space and make it easy for people to make choices around that, whether that's some form of food labeling around sustainability or something like that. Okay, and if we come to you, James, for the final word on this in terms of the biggest thing that you think needs to change to unlock progress in addressing algal blooms.
Well, I would build on everything colleagues on the call have already said, and that is the public discourse. We saw at the election just what could be done with sewage pollution, with a huge amount of, in fact, using the Wye as an example, 4 out of 5 seats changed colour on the River Wye. And every single person voted for, and you can say the same at places like Henley on the Thames, in fact, a long stretch of the Thames. People's top environmental ticket was sewage pollution. We need the same for agricultural pollution. And of course, I'm not suggesting that algal blooms are solely caused by agriculture, but it is a major issue, particularly in rural areas. And that by having that increased public knowledge and awareness, assuming the media will pick up on these stories, which we believe they will, then we'll see that pressure applied onto government, into industry, and ultimately, and as Graham put it very nicely, you know, love your river. And I would say also your farmer. You know, we need to have a genuine reconnection, whether you're an urban or rural dweller, to be able to go to your river, your lake, your coastal area, wherever it is, your local water body, and to feel that you are part of it. It is, you know, 70% of your blood, or your body rather. It is literally the lifeblood of our economy. And if you were to care more about it and to feel a greater connection with it, whether you're swimming, rowing, fishing, or just bathing in it, and or bobbing around with your kids or whatever, if we were to have that connection, and similarly to put farmers back at the centre of our rural communities, and for them to feel the support and the love, and I really mean that, the kindness of their community and their appreciation, then I really do believe, perhaps naively, I hope not, but I really do believe that we can make a difference.
Brilliant. And that was an excellent note to end on. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I've really enjoyed your diverse perspectives, but I can also see lots of common threads between them around collaborative action and certainly people valuing water. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I'm going to hand back to Rebecca now to cover the logistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to all the speakers from that panel. I echo what everyone is saying in the chat, that was really interesting, insightful, and invigorating discussion, focusing on lots of the different key themes that, as we said, all kind of intersect with algal blooms. It really highlights so much else. So thank you. Apologies that we are a few minutes late heading to the break, but thankfully we did schedule in a good chunk of time anyway. So anyone returning at midday we'll need to go into the next session, which is our science deep dive. So I won't hold anyone up for any longer, and I'll see you at 12. Thanks again, everyone who's contributed so far.
Thank you. Bye-bye.